So Steins Gate Zero has now concluded. There is an OVA that will be coming out. It's around November or December, and I imagine that's going to tackle one of the endings that this anime didn't obviously use. However, Steins Gate Zero has concluded 100%. It ties back into the first series. Everything about the Steins Gate story to me has been wrapped up in such a beautiful package that I am 100% content with everything that we just got. Having this end after the credits era, make sure you watch after the credits, seeing Okabe return to such a horrible past to rescue Mayuri and Suzuha. That is just the best way to wrap this up, because even though Steins Gate Zero is the worst world line that Okabe had to live through, and even though it was destined to fail, it doesn't mean that Okabe can't have some sort of happiness in such a messed up world line. This episode did pretty much everything that I was anticipating last week, except for one thing that I probably should have realized that would happen, but didn't for whatever reason. I'd never clued in on the fact that once Suzuha and Mayuri send the message, they're gonna have to bounce back, because if they stayed in that location, it would cause a paradox, so they would have to leave. But if they have no fuel, they would obviously either get killed or thrown into a random point in the past. So I actually liked that moment. I wasn't anticipating that, so it was a nice surprise 100%. But this episode, brilliant. I think the pacing was fantastic. I'm sure not everyone's going to agree with me with this, but I think it did everything it needed to do in about a 20-minute fashion, which I thought it could, because all that really had to happen was get that time machine out of there before it gets blown up, make sure Mayuri smacks some sense into Okabe, and then Okabe sends the message. That's all that needed to happen, and that's what happened 100%. Having this episode just function in the way it did, the pacing in that first half was so good. I'm glad it was about 10 minutes of the first half there, getting that time machine out of there. Having Okabe call Moika a lab member, that was just such a nice, like, okay, the man's back in action. I'm glad that some of the stuff that we always loved about that first series is here. Even though we're facing some horrible situations here, professors pulling a gun, Okabe saying, like, you want some information on the future? I'll give you the information. Moika just coming in, kicking some ass, knocking the professor out. Okabe being like, you're a lab member, let's do this. It was just such a nostalgic feeling that I absolutely loved. But I also love how Okabe doesn't just barge in on the rooftop, he actually listens into what Mayuri is saying, and that situation was incredibly tense. I've criticized the action in Steins Gate Zero, but that one-on-one action sequence, it was very quick, it was very precise with what it wanted to do between Kaguri as well as Suzuha, and I thought it was brilliantly done, even more so when Mayuri gets in between their guns. Like, that girl is too pure for this world. After nearly getting her head blown off, she's just like, oh, that was so frightening, I'm so glad you guys didn't shoot. Such a pure moment, but I like how she does convince Kaguri to calm down, because Kaguri does have a reason to be upset. As far as she's concerned, you want to erase the future that she has. That's her mother, like, that's who raised her as a mother, and you want to erase that. So I think there's a believable reason why Kaguri was acting that way, and I actually like the idea of inviting her to come along, like, you can help us change the past, you can do this, you can be with your mother. It was a nice moment, but I do like the fact that when Okabe does charge in and say, like, you have to do this, you got this, complete this mission 100%, Kaguri ends up supporting Okabe instead of going with Mayuri, which I thought was a really nice touch, because I actually was expecting her to just settle with going with Mayuri, go to the past, so I thought it was a nice surprise actually having her be like, no, this is the person my mother worships, I heard it in the past, or technically the future. You know, if she would have been able to convince Okabe to try again, everything would have been better, so she's buying into the fact that if my mother trusts you and you're saying you're not going to let her die, I will support you and defend you here. I thought that was such a great moment. Sure, Kaguri may not have been used as much as I would have liked in this series, but I thought it was a nice bow to tie up her character for what we got to see with Steins Gate Zero, and having Okabe not scared for once, watching that missile come in, him just being like, I got this. This is the time that they successfully time jump and not get destroyed. And him just throwing it in the professor's face, throwing it in all the soldiers' face that you lost, I've won, this time machine no longer exists. The war isn't going to start here. I love that so damn much. That was brilliant. It was such a, oh man, Kiyoma's back in action and he is kicking some ass and taking some names. But I do like actually finally seeing how that message gets to Mayuri, because obviously they were never going to meet face to face. That would be a paradox. That would be very, very bad. But that phone call was so nice. I love hearing just Mayuri being like, what? How am I talking to myself? But just how they directed it. It was so nice because you knew, like, they only have a few minutes. You know, how is she going to convince herself to smack some sense into Okabe, literally? And I thought they did a really nice job. It was subtle, it was quick, but I think they did a very solid job at just explaining how she was able to convince herself, and there was some nice directing there as well. But what they did exceptionally well is they didn't repeat information. Now, this episode, part of it takes place in episode 23 of the first series, and that's when Okabe comes out saying he killed, shouldn't even try again, there's no point in me trying, and then Mayuri slaps some sense. They end up going silent and then playing music on some of the conversation that we've already seen in the first anime, because there's no point in repeating information. We just need to show how that past information connects to Steins Gate Zero, which they did a phenomenal job with. But actually seeing how that message finally was recorded, I always assumed the message that Okabe got in episode 23 was from a very depressed Okabe. Like, even though he was obviously Kyoma in that situation, the way the message was presented, it was almost like, man, this guy has a shitty future. But actually seeing that he had a camera crew this time, and he was just, everyone was smiling. They're like, does Steins Gate exist, Okabe? And he's like, it absolutely exists. He's this moral compass. Like, everyone's kind of like, for obvious reasons, is this even the right outcome? Is there actually a Steins Gate? Are we kind of chasing a fool's dream? That fool being Okabe, and him being like, I absolutely believe Steins Gate exists, and 100% this is going to work. That's all that needed to happen. And they hit all the notes I wanted, and I felt the pacing was right, because the stuff that they kind of skimmed over, they should skim over. We don't need to see the full conversation that we saw in episode 23 with how Mayuri convinces Okabe to try again after that slap. We understand that. But seeing how that message was recorded from the beta world line, that's something we did need to see. And then actually seeing Okabe saying like, okay, I have to die in this year, but just because I have to die in this year doesn't mean maybe I can just hop out and go to a different reality. The whole point of Steins Gate is deceiving the world. The way Okabe deceives Kurasu's death is by using that lightsaber in his closet and faking the blood and everything to make it look like Kurasu dies. That's why her father will then end up running away even though she's not dead. The whole point of this series is you have to make reality think things are happening. Okabe has to get shot on that roof. That's something that has to happen. So he got shot. But the time machine just has to leave that year. It doesn't actually have to get destroyed. Kurasu doesn't have to die. Things like that, I just love that. That's what makes Steins Gate and how it handles time travel very interesting, is because it understands paradox. It understands how it can deceive reality and people in general, and that's so fantastic. And seeing those final moments where you think like Suzuha and Mayuri could easily die here, even if they did, you're like, it still ends up leading to a better future, and I think that's acceptable. But actually ending after the credits there with Okabe being like, apologies for keeping you waiting there, that gives you butterflies. The way the music was handled in this episode was so damn good. Having the original opening playing in this episode as well, like, that was just icing on the cake. Steins Gate Zero is not without its faults. There are pacing issues for sure. Some characters go underused, like Ferris and Ruka really aren't that relevant in Steins Gate Zero that much. There's obviously things that you can pick apart, but I honestly think Steins Gate Zero is just as enjoyable as the first Steins Gate, because it's the other half of the story we never got to see, but secretly wanted. When I watch Steins Gate, when I rewatch it, I'm going to watch Steins Gate and then I'm going to rewatch Steins Gate Zero, because this is two halves of the same story. This is a completely new experience, but it's also crucial in order for Steins Gate to actually exist, because one Okabe had to fail so another could exist. And I think that's so fantastic. I think this is one of the best time travel stories to ever be made in any medium, and I think this was a wonderful conclusion. I'm very excited to see how that OVA is going to tie in, if it's just going to be a random episode, if it is going to be alternative endings for one of the arcs that didn't get adapted. Nonetheless, this was fantastic. I will have a full review of Steins Gate Zero coming out in a couple of weeks, so look forward to that. Let me know whatever you're feeling down in the comment section below. Remember to hit that like if you did enjoy, and also be sure to subscribe to the channel if you happen to be new. But until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.